thanks to Nick for having us here. We're going to talk about something a bit different. We design satirical games, traditional kind of board games, and we're very interested in how games reflect and affect on the real world. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to start with this film. Hopefully you'll see it. You haven't got homework. War games, just in case you haven't, it's about a computer game obsessed teenager who hacks into a military supercomputer and challenges it to play a game and accidentally precipitates the start of World War III, as it could happen if you do that. Where it goes wrong is that he plays the computer a game called Global Thermonuclear War, and unfortunately for Matthew Broderick and the rest of the world, the computer doesn't know the difference between simulation and real life, and that's where all the problems arise. The interesting bit in war games for me is the climatic scene. Here's a screenshot of it. The kind of launch codes have started, and there's 10,000 nuclear warheads pointing towards Russia, and it looks like the world is doomed. And the computer on the screen starts playing out various iterations of global thermonuclear war and testing different strategies, different launch strategies, targets, different countries firing first, and so on. And these cycle through in their kind of hundreds. And just when it's going to be too late, the timer stops and the screen goes blank. And the computer issues the immortal words, a strange game, the only winning move is not to play. So this seems to be a good setting for this talk, which is basically about games blurring the boundaries and the territories between the virtual game space and the real world. So just want you to hold that in mind, and we'll jump forward 27 years to 2010. An American game inventor called Brenda Braithwaite makes a bit of a storm when she brings out this game called Train. In Train, the players have to pack their carriages as full as possible with their cargo and transport them successfully to the terminus. Once the players reach the terminus, however, it's revealed that the terminus is Auschwitz, and everyone's been taking part in a simulation of the final solution. But what's really interesting in this game is not a kind of bait and switch tactic, but what happens after that point. There are a range of strategies open to players, from full compliance to the game's objective, so kind of literally just following orders of the game, to voluntary kind of sabotage and subversion of the game, where you can try and derail your carriage and basically deliberately lose the game, and I guess trying to reach for a kind of moral victory, if that's possible even. So recalling the lesson that the computer learned in war games, Brenda Braithwaite herself tells a very interesting anecdote of how she took this game to a rabbi for some feedback. And the rabbi looked at this game and he said, I get what you're doing, I understand the game, but I don't want to play it. And she told him, you already did. And she's quite right, because the rabbi kind of instinctively, through not wanting to play it, kind of drew out the central lesson of the game, which is all about compliance and authority. So you might think that this is a long way away from the kind of games you're familiar with that some of you might have even played over the Christmas season. But actually our most familiar games do have kind of hidden educational origins. There's a Victorian kind of moralistic game that was designed to show children the difference between choosing good and evil paths, and we know that the magic originally the language able to various virtues, like saying greed and avarice. Probably the most famous game in the world started off as the Landlord's Game, is what it was called back in 1905, designed by an American lady again, Elizabeth McGee, and that was designed initially to show how the rich owning class exploited and got rich off the back of poor renting class. And it was only in 1935 when it was sold to Parker Brothers for the princely sum of $500 that it became maybe you should bear this in mind next time you're skinning your relatives for renting apartments. rather ironic that, yeah, it's now become a celebration of the very things the initial game tried to subvert, but those things happen. So the thing is that board games, actually right from the very beginning, going back 5,000 years to ancient Egypt, have been always concerned with real-world things by and large. They've been driven by a need to represent and explain and make sense of the world and present that to people. Unfortunately, there's no time for a history lesson, so you kind of have to trust me on that. And speak at length about that if you want to ask me later. So this brings us to us. This is where we come in, kind of 2003. We were watching the news just before the invasion of Iraq, pretty depressed, feeling quite powerless, so we wanted to do something about it. Everything else had failed, marches, whatever. And even though we knew nothing about game design, you could argue we still don't, and we knew nothing about publishing, we were kind of drawn instinctively to use the board game as the medium with which to protest, I guess. So we basically kind of drew upon games we're familiar with, like Risk, Monopoly, Diplomacy, mixed in with it a heavy dose of realpolitik of the day. We were very concerned with how the fragility of diplomatic relations, how enemies become allies and allies enemies overnight, and also the contrast between public and private discourse. Public discourse was all for the good, and private discourse mostly all for money. So what happens in War on Terror is, very briefly, everyone starts off as an empire. You have to liberate the world. It's liberation at all costs, which usually involves acts of horrific violence. And you have to, of course, control the oil. And all games kind of spiral downwards from there. But what we realised from the very first kind of games was that we had something quite special. There were two main lessons that I learned from testing War on Terror. The first was just how liberating it was to laugh at subjects that we've been told for so long you couldn't laugh at. Very serious subjects, subjects shrouded in fear, like the language of fear that surrounds terrorism, narrow discussion to the point where if you can laugh at it, suddenly it kind of managed to free up this discussion. And in fact, using the lexicon of terrorism and fear as part of the game absolutely smashed that kind of Pavlovian response of silent compliance that we had all been used to previous to it. There's an example of one of the ways we kind of play with the language. It is a game of global liberation as opposed to domination. The second lesson that really kind of struck me from playing the game again and again, and I think anyone here who's played it can attest to this, is how quickly and naturally people take to deception. And in the game, you are armed, you can be really aggressive, you're armed with an array of tools, but it's not necessarily a good idea to be that aggressive because you will just get shot down for it. So quite voluntarily, and it's not part of the game doesn't demand it, but people started sugarcoating their actions, they started justifying them within the game. And they would say, well, I had to attack player A, because player A had nuclear weapons and they were going to use them on me. I had to attack player B, they were funding too much terrorism and endangering the stability of the world. And these rationalizations started to eerily echo the narrative of the time. And Orwell said that political language is used to make lies sound truthful and no respectable. And really, I kind of never realised the profound truth of that statement until I was responsible for the kind of behaviour that led to that sort of observation. And I think that gets to the heart of how games are really very powerful. You actually take part in something rather than just absorb something. So we kind of developed this in isolation for about 2.5 years, and then we realised another lesson about War on Terror. And that is really the idea of the game itself. You didn't actually have to play it. So basically one morning before the game was being released, we woke up to this. It's our local newspaper called The Sick on their front page, and said we were publishing this at the expense of terror victims, terror victims. And in fact, in the following week, this narrative was echoed all over the world, with a slight variation of, depending on the geographic location, we were sick in the UK for making fun of 7/7 victims. We were sick in Australia for making fun of the Bali bomb victims, and of course in America we were sick for making fun of 9/11 victims. This only kind of proved our theory of terrorism being the last taboo correct, but it was still pretty depressing that the subjects of the game were not up for discussion. It was like the ethics of producing such a game that we found ourselves kind of defending at the time. So the initial effect of that was basically kind of commercial isolation. We got banned from all sorts of industry fairs and high street, couldn't go near it. But when people kind of started playing the game, luckily they discovered there was something worthwhile there, and it got a bit of a cult following. And then since then it's taken on a life of its own, and it really has kind of reached places that we never thought about. It's a clear example in an art gallery. This is the Berlin Academy of Arts. A bit weird to see it in a case where we can't interact with it. Appeared on a sitcom with IT crowds. And even on the front line of the War of Terror itself. We still can't quite reconcile ourselves. Yeah, I won't stay on that image too long. It's even been confiscated by the police, actually. They seized it as a potentially dangerous weapon because the game was a balaclava, and they argued you could disguise your identity if you were to commit a criminal act using this balaclava. And in fact, this is the official police photograph that they proudly released to the nations. My conclusion was that basically what this taught us that there wasn't just a market for historical games, there was actually an absolute need for it, and there was something innately powerful in the medium itself. And we realised that we really would never have had the same reach and effect with a book or a film or something like that. There was something about the game that really resonated. The game is actually, it's in the permanent collections of places like the Imperial War Museum, the Victorian Albert Museum, and the Bodleian Library. And I think it's safe to say that that's territory that board games don't normally go into. So as a political medium, it's a great one. So we went on and we released Crunch, the game for us with bankers, about the kind of fragility of the global financial system. And we're at the moment working on our third game about civil liberties. But recently, an interesting area for us, to finish on this, is we've been doing what are called print and play games, which are kind of more immediate things. It takes about 2 years, more or less, to produce a product like this. But print and play games we give away free on the internet. People can print them off and play them using tools readily available around the house. They're frivolous, short games, but they allow us to comment on actual events very quickly. Very recently, just for Christmas in fact, we got our first commission. This is Greenpeace commissioned us to design this for them as to support their campaign on deep sea drilling and marine reserves. And that perhaps hints at a new direction. So just before I get into trouble, to answer the first question, are games becoming part of our political landscape? They always have been. Monopoly and Snakes and Ladders show that's nothing new. What's interesting for us is whether they can change the political landscape, and that's a much bigger question. I believe they can, that's why we're doing